So I've been getting massages lately to rehab an injury, and massage therapists from 2 states now have told me that most of their clients are stressed out teachers, which maybe that's not such a big surprise because besides the age-old pressure for kids to do well on the standardized tests, we also have teachers now still trying to fill in learning gaps left over from the pandemic, as well as managing difficult, sometimes volatile behaviors in the classroom, like students kicking over chairs in frustration or shouting at the teacher or shouting at other kids, and teachers having to manage their own emotions in trying to deal with those situations in the classroom. The good news is that researchers have done a lot to be able to figure out how our brains develop, function, and learn in the last couple of decades. And I found that 5 synergistic, evidence-based, brain-friendly practices restored the joy in education for both my students and me. In fact, I found these 5 practices seemed to bring back the joy in education for my students and me, as well as, not only did our classroom become a more supportive and cohesive environment, but I felt my students learned how to think as well as just what to think. And I gotta tell you, it was pretty fun when they kicked booty on the standardized tests. And you probably heard about a lot of these practices before, but using these 5 practices we're going to talk about just felt like magic. 3 of the practices prepared my students' brains before we got into learning. And you know what? Let me give you a little taste of what I'm talking about. We're going to play a game called Add a Move, and I'm going to put this down for a sec. We're going to play a little game called Add a Move to prepare your brain to be able to focus better on my presentation. Okay, so you're just going to do what I do, and I'm going to make a move, and then we're going to add moves. Okay, so everybody shake out your hands. Nice. Okay, now shake out your hands and snap and swirl. Okay, great. Now shake out your hands and snap and swirl and clap. Oh, thank you. No, just kidding. Okay, now you're going to shake out your hands and snap and swirl and clap and flash. Nice. Let's do one more. Let's shake out our hands and snap and swirl and clap and flash and toss up our hands. Woohoo! Very good. Nice work, everyone. And I hope you're feeling a little more relaxed and refreshed. See, here's the thing. Studies show an anxious brain has trouble learning. And students come into the classroom from all kinds of circumstances. You know, they have a sick grandmother in the hospital they're worried about, or mom yelled at them before they left for school, or one of their friends said something that hurt their feelings in the hallway just before they walked in the door. We never know what's going on with kids. And I found that when we played these little games, when they would come into the room, it would relax them so that they could think. We also played these games when they would start to get a little spacey, or when they'd start to get fidgety, messing around their desks or whatever. And a lot of teachers are starting to do this now. We call them brain breaks. The other 2 practices to prepare kids' brains for learning, I kind of learned by accident. So by the time my husband and I decided to have kids, I had already taught several ages and grades, and I thought, oh my gosh, I got this wired. I'm going to be great at this kid raising thing. Except that we were blessed with 2 amazing girls, both of whom had challenges. So one of them had attention issues and auditory processing problems, and the other one she suffered from anxiety, so she would break into crying jags and have accidents at school. So here, I was supposed to be an expert with kids, and I felt like I was failing our own children. So I went on a quest to help them. I talked to their pediatrician and a psychologist and a neurologist, and I read books and articles and studies, and we did a lot of trial and error. And my kids were really good sports because not everything works so well. But we did manage to find some things to improve our communication and build their self-confidence and develop social skills. And academically, they just took off. Well, around about the same time, I had a particularly difficult fourth grade class. It was one of those classes where I was like, how am I going to get through this school year? So to manage the stress, a teacher buddy of mine and I ran 6 miles most mornings before school. And I say most mornings because one day I'm in the classroom giving directions, and William, one of my more challenging students, interrupts me in the middle of a sentence and he says, Mrs. Wilkinson, did you run this morning? And I was taken aback, and I said, no, I had an appointment this morning. Why? And he turns beet red when he says, because you're not as funny and happy today. I didn't even know I was behaving any differently. I had no idea there was a difference. And I felt the whole class like take this deep breath like he's in trouble. But I had an epiphany. I said, wow, William, you're right. I feel way better when I get a cardio workout in the morning. And we encourage our own kids to exercise to help them relax and focus. You know what? Everybody stand up. And from then on, we did 10 minutes of exercise before we got into learning. And so we'd do a little workout in the classroom, or we'd run around the track or jump rope, any number of things. And why 10 minutes? Because it's all I thought we had time for. And it wasn't enough for them to get stinky and smelly. So a whole classroom of kids right after PE. Whew, better to do that in the afternoon. Anyway, so we got this, but then, and something I want to point out about that too. And why 10 minutes? It turns out that 10 minutes, these researchers in Canada came out with a study to find out how little exercise we could get away with and still get all the brain benefits. And it's 10 minutes, yes. Lucky for us, right? And the thing I want to point out about this is that 10 minutes saved so much time because the kids were awake and more positive and alert and just ready to go. They did get thirsty after our little workout though. And after the first day of waiting in a long line at the drinking fountain for everybody to get a drink, I said, we can't do that every day. So I encouraged them to all bring a water bottle to school, a personalized water bottle. And that was such a novelty that everyone brought a water bottle in the first couple of days. And then it was a nightmare because all of the kids were running to the bathroom. And I thought, what have I done? But we ended up talking about boundaries and working out procedures, and the novelty wore off. And by the end of the week, problem solved. And the next year after that, no problem, because I already knew what to do. So we gave them little brain games so they could relax and focus, or just reboot their brain when they would get spacey. They got to get a 10-minute workout to get all their brain chemicals in gear so they could learn, and they got to get hydration. You know, the United States Geological Society states that our brains are about 73% water. So trying to learn dehydrated is kind of like riding a bike on flat tires. I mean, you can do it, just not nearly as well, right? So we did those 3 things to prepare their brains for learning. The 4th practice that I learned, first with our own kids in trying to support them in getting their homework done, and then with my students, it seemed to boost their brain power and engagement, was we established a purpose for what they were learning. I don't know about you, but I really appreciate GPS for getting me where I want to go. Believe me, I need GPS. But first, I have to know where I'm going, and I have to have a reason to get there. And it turns out learning is a lot the same way. So when I would introduce a new topic or unit or concept skill, whatever we were doing, we would brainstorm together how students might use that skill or concept or whatever in their lives. And you can't believe the cool stuff the kids would come up with. At first it was a little slow, but then they got used to doing this all the time. They would come up with stuff I never would have thought of, which was so much fun. And Generation Z has this reputation for having a short attention span, and they have to be rewarded quickly or they'll just check out, and all kinds of disparaging things. And I think they just have way less tolerance for doing activities without a clear purpose. And Generation Alpha coming up, being even more exposed to the immediate responses that electronics provide, they're going to be even more so that way. But I found that when my students participated in defining a purpose for whatever we were doing, I didn't have to jump through hoops to get them to pay attention or participate. They engaged on their own. And the fifth practice, the one that kind of ties it all together, was after we had gotten finished with whatever we were working on, we would give their brains an opportunity to process what they learned. So I would just, there we go, I would just set the timer and for 5 minutes, and they would have quiet time to write in their journal about what they learned and how they might use that information in their lives. Then the timer would go off and they'd get a partner and they would take turns sharing how they might use that information in their, what they learned and how they might use that information. I'd hear things like, wow, I didn't even think of that. I'm going to add that to my journal, which, it just made me so happy to hear that, because they went from this class that was clashing all the time and just so difficult to really working together. We had developed this beautiful community, and being able to give their brains just a short period to process what they learned instead of just running on to the next thing and then sharing it with another human being seemed to solidify principles and concepts in their minds. So I would run into kids years later, they'd be a head taller and they'd say, hi, Mrs. Wilkinson, do you remember when we did such and such a project? I still use that skill all the time, which of course, as a teacher, that would make my month, right? And because I felt a little harried and overworked, like a lot of teachers, after we got on a roll doing these practices in the classroom and it became part of our routine, I had students organize and do the practices. So all I had to do was facilitate their learning. So, and you'd be amazed at how good they are at doing this. From toddlers to teens, they take it really seriously. So it would be a student who would decide on the games and lead the games that we would play on a given day. And it was a student who would arrange and run the workout in the morning. And it was a student who would lead the brainstorming. You get the idea. So they would just all rotate these practices, and wow, what a community. Teaching became fun again. It was just so much fun. They went from completely squirrely, sometimes volatile, or just completely checked out, to curious and engaged and invested. And the first year I did these 5 practices in the classroom, those 4th graders did so well on the standardized tests that a proctor was placed in my classroom the following year to prove I wasn't cheating. And I taught 5th and 6th grade language arts the following year using the same practices, and our scores came in at the top of the district. Not because I'm so amazing. I found out all this stuff by accident, right? They're just brain-friendly things that anyone can do. Can you imagine what it would be like if entire schools used these practices in the classroom, where kids got to prepare their brains for learning doing those 3 things, where they get to play brain games when they need to refocus, when they get to do 10 minutes of exercise to get their brains in gear, where they get to drink water so their brains work efficiently. where they get to define a purpose for what they're learning, that they choose on their own so it has meaning for them, where they have the opportunity to process what they learn for sticking power. Imagine the impact this could have on the entire school community. Here's the thing. Hopefully, teachers would still get occasional massages, because massages are wonderful. I mean, let's just admit it. They're great. I may be rehabbing an injury, but massages are awesome. But massage therapists might have to get a few new clients, because I believe we truly can restore the joy in education for both teachers and students. In my experience, these 5 synergistic, evidence-based, brain-friendly practices not only save time, but they're inexpensive, super effective, and they're accessible to everyone. Can I get a yes from everyone out there who would like to see more joy in education? Yes! Absolutely. Anyway, thank you so much for your time and attention.